ever wondered why the Spider-Man comics aren't as compelling as they once were? Well, watch to the end and I'll explain why in Zeb Wells' latest issue this problem is on show more than ever before. So you've probably heard, like in the last year or so, that the Amazing Spider-Man comics are nowhere near on the level that they should be. And if you've watched my many videos on the comics in the past, you'll know that every time a brand new issue of this series comes out, we talk about it and I'll give you my pros and cons. And thus far, it's been pretty terrible. The last few issues, however, haven't been the worst thing I've ever read. And to be honest with you, they've been pretty tolerable. If you don't know, the recent story basically follows Peter Parker and he has the sins of the Green Goblin. Don't ask me how that works, but it's kind of like an infestation thing. So he's essentially this amalgamation of the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, which sounds pretty freaking cool if you ask me. Except I kind of hoped they'd do more with it. You see, this concept is actually fresh and it's different. In my last few videos, I was hopeful that they'd make this story into something more and run with it. The main concept has Peter going around New York and getting revenge for people that have wronged him. That concept has a lot of weight to it and there's a lot that you can do with the characters with that type of story. However, 3 issues into this arc, it's already over and nothing's happened. Either way, the idea had so much potential that it never followed through on. For example, Peter could have hunted down many of his villains from his largely chaotic past, but yet only really goes after Kraven the Hunter and Paul and MJ. Yeah, that's right, he goes after Mary Jane Watson. As if there weren't like hundreds of other villains that have tried to kill him in the last 60 years. Either way, this leads us to a showdown between Peter and MJ, as Peter tries to kill Paul. By the way, MJ has powers now. Yeah, I know, don't ask, it's a thing. But either way, Peter is almost successful in killing MJ's new lover, but eventually, he survives. And that's pretty much the whole issue. Oh, and by the way, Norman is the Green Goblin again. Yeah, I forgot to point out that small detail. Have you caught on to what the problem is yet? Yeah, I bet you have. It's the same problem that these comics have always had. They don't change. This story was a great way to introduce some consequences for the characters, and was a good way to maybe shake things up for a little bit and make things a little bit more interesting. Peter Parker as a character has been stale for the longest time, with fans complaining that Marvel doesn't let him grow up or explore new avenues of his life. For example, the last time that Peter had a stable and consistent relationship with Mary Jane Watson was in the early 2000s, which was 20 years ago. Considering Mary Jane and Peter Parker are only second to Superman and Lois as the comic book power couple of the world, that is very, very appalling. However this story was to happen, you'd think that they'd change the status quo in one way or another to accommodate for maybe some of the consequences that would have come from this story even existing in the first place. Like, you give Peter Parker Green Goblin powers and, you know, you've got to expect something's gonna happen, right? But no. Nothing happened. Which is exactly the problem I have with modern Spider-Man comics in general. It just so happens that this comic perfectly backs up my point. But I'm not done there. Let's look at some of the things that the comic could have done differently that could potentially have had a lasting effect and consequence on the story going forward. I think the first thing that springs to mind is that they could have killed Kraven the Hunter. If you guys remember a few issues ago, Spider-Man hunted down Kraven and basically threw him in a grave the same way that Kraven threw him in a grave in Kraven's Last Hunt. And if you remember, after Kraven's Last Hunt, Kraven actually got reincarnated and had a curse placed upon him. And to basically trim all the fat from that story, basically all you've got to know is Kraven didn't want to be reincarnated, but the only way that he can die is that Spider-Man has to kill him. And essentially that's like the whole story, right? This would be a perfect way to finally kill off Kraven the Hunter. And it's almost like this hunt and this story was set up for Kraven to die. If Peter had killed Kraven, it would have rounded off Kraven's story that has been lingering over the Spider-Man books for a long time. And you've got to remember that Peter is basically the Green Goblin at this point, so his no killing rule is out of the window. Not to mention that when Peter's goblin powers do eventually get revoked, it could be a good jumping on point for some good classic Spider-Man guilt and resentment. This issue tries to emulate this anyway by having Peter kind of being guilty about being the Green Goblin and the effect that he had on everyone else, but I'm not gonna lie, there was no point because Peter didn't actually really do anything wrong. He didn't hurt anyone, he didn't kill anyone, he just nothing happened. There were no consequences to his actions. Spider-Man being against killing is a massive part of who the character is, and if Peter had been forced to kill through the actions of the Green Goblin, that would have hit the character hard. Not only would it have provided an interesting story going forward, but it would have tackled one of Spider-Man's core ideologies that have been present in the character for such a long time. So yeah, that is the first change that I would make. I would make Spider-Man kill Kraven the Hunter, just at least for some lasting consequences. And the second thing that I would probably do is I'd probably give a little bit more consequence to Peter's and MJ's relationship. They're already broken up and Peter is already distraught about her being with Paul. Well, why not play off that even more? I'm not saying we should kill Paul. I mean, as good as that would be, all you've got to do essentially is make the rift between Peter and MJ even bigger. Now, I know that's not what a lot of fans want, but hear me out. If you want to create some kind of realistic and good storytelling character drama, then this would be a perfect way to have MJ and Peter actually not be on level terms. But at the end of the book, nothing like this actually happens. In fact, MJ even forgives Peter right there and then, even though he tried to kill her new boyfriend, which doesn't make any sense. And as nice as this panel is, because we haven't seen anything like this in a long time, oh my god, as much as I crave for Peter and MJ to be together. Once again, this not only proves my point, but also straight up shows us the main issue of Spider-Man in the modern comics. There will be no lasting consequence of this fight that they had in this issue. Editorial aren't willing to let the character change enough for anything to happen. Once again, this was the perfect opportunity to spice up the comics with some character drama, but they avoided it like most of you avoid this run. The only saving grace that I believe was done pretty well throughout this entire run and was kind of emulated in this issue was Norman becoming the Goblin again. Now, while I know this is basically just rehashing the same thing that we've seen a million times in the past, I've got to give credit where credit is due. Even though I hate the concept of Norman Osborn being a good guy, and I know that should have never happened in the first place, the chemistry that Wells writes between Peter and Norman is, I dare say, pretty good. The only issue I have is that he's trying to act as if Norman has been friends with everyone for the longest time. There's a panel in this issue where Norman is like, "It's been good to getting to know you, Mary Jane." It's like, bro, you started talking to her last issue, come on. But one thing I'm actually excited to see is the massive boil over with Peter and Norman going at it again. I do believe this will actually be pretty emotional since they've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last 30 or so issues. Them working together over the Zeb Wells run has been pretty cool to see, and I'm not gonna lie, it's actually kind of grown on me slightly. While we're also on a positive, I also want to point out that Gleason's art here is fantastic. MJ in this issue looks great. Most of the characters look really cool as well. And oh my god, this is one of the greatest illustrations of Spider-Man I have seen in a long ass time. Oh my god, this is good. To round off this video, I want to show you guys something. Basically, if you don't know, Nick Lowe, the editor, basically reads out a bunch of letters that the fans sent in, and he responds to them at the end of every single issue. And one of the letters sent in for this issue really proves my point, and is actually kind of ironic given it's in this issue as well. And this is what the letter reads. Dear Spider-Man team, I don't want to insult or come at anybody on the team. I know a lot of emails are probably very hateful, insulting, or threatening, and I really want to convey that I'm trying to write this in the most respectful and civil way possible. There is writing from each and every single person on the team that I enjoy and love. With that said, I'm sure that the entire team receives an absurd amount of hate mail about One More Day. I'm a part of the vast majority of people who hate that entire storyline. I'm sure it was written with love for the character, and I do not in any way think that I could write it better or anything, as it isn't my job. It's yours. With that said, I'm just genuinely curious as to why Peter Parker of Earth 616 can't just develop. Why shouldn't he be allowed to be married, have a kid? Bruce Wayne has a ton of kids, if you count all of the Robins. If you don't, then he has Damian Wayne. Clark Kent as John Kent and Lois Lane. Characters having their families doesn't make them unlikable or change the status quo enough to hurt them. We like them being happy. I know Peter being married and having a kid shakes up the status quo, but that does not have to be a bad thing. It does not feel like Peter is developing in any way. What would have been Aunt May's death during One More Day was a large, dramatic, and fitting repercussion from Peter revealing his identity, and could have stayed that way for Peter to realize how heavily his actions influence his loved ones. I don't think necessarily that me sending this is going to even change anything. I feel like you probably get tens of thousands of letters a month complaining about this exact thing, so I guess I'm wondering, if the Spidey team knows that a vast majority of fans dislike how things went down, then why is it still how things went down? Why hasn't it been retconned or something? I know sales are still good, but maybe sales would be even better if Spidey fans got what they've been mailing you that they've wanted for years. I just really cannot possibly understand the logic behind any of it, and I'd like to understand. Hoping the entire team stays healthy and well, a Spidey fan. I think this makes some very bold claims, but some very good points also. Since One More Day, Peter and MJ have not been together as much as they should be. Per this as well, the fan mentions that they don't let Peter grow up anymore, and that his character is left at a status quo that the team and I think the editorial thinks is better for the character. Even though this is definitely not the case, and most fans, including you and me, want Peter to grow up, have a kid, and get married. I really like the respectful and adult approach that this letter made to the editorial. I think it tells the editorial what they're doing wrong and what the fans really don't like about the character without getting aggressive. Because I know many fans online, including myself when I've been frustrated in some videos, probably don't come across in the way that we should. I think this letter was perfect, but just look at what the editorial had to respond with. Nick Lowe responds by saying, "Thanks for writing. A Spidey fan, and I truly appreciate your civil and respectful tone. Going to respond to a few things here. We get fan mail, but we certainly don't get a lot of mail about One More Day. That came out 15 years ago. From my POV, you're overstating the vast majority thing. Most months, we don't get any letters about One More Day. When we do a story with Peter and MJ, we sometimes get a dozen emails from fans who want them to be married again, like you. We get more letters from people talking about other things altogether. We don't get tens of thousands of letters a month about anything, to be honest, as most readers just read the book and feel however they feel about it. You're passionate, which I totally respect and appreciate, but you're also making a lot of assumptions about a large fanbase and retailer community. Sorry to say, but these assumptions aren't born out of our metrics. Again, I respect your opinion and appreciate you writing in." At the end of the day, I think the editorial just ain't it. And I think personally, the way that they responded to this was completely and utterly out of order. You look at the comic that we have just had, and you look at the points that I have just laid out on the table about Spider-Man not being able to move on, and also about how his character doesn't develop through any of the stories that Marvel places down. Well, this guy literally came in and called Marvel out about this and asked for a reason as to why they don't develop the character anymore, like marrying him with MJ or him having a kid, for example. But Nick Lowe and the editorial literally don't say anything about this, tread carefully over the entire message, and don't even respond to the main concern about Peter developing. I think that just says everything about the editorial, and I think it says everything about Nick Lowe and the team that we have right now at Marvel HQ. I'm not trying to say that I could do better, although I don't know, man, maybe I could, you know? But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? And I'll see you guys in the next one.